It feels like nowadays there's a sickness in our hearts, a screaming soul inside all of us begging to be freed. And that's because we found ourselves cast into a world consumed by hatred, by pain. Despite how similar we are as a species, as human beings, because of rapid growth and confusion, we have strayed further apart than ever before. And yet, in the throes of chaos, it's important we never forget what makes us great. Each other. So today, I want to talk about a small and unknown game that reminded me of just this fact. Reminded me that however divided we become, we can be roused from our sleep as a citizen of the world and discover again what makes us great. Here is my analysis of one of the most moving games I've played in a while, Citizen Sleeper. Citizen Sleeper is a weird game. On one hand, it's mundane and cumbersome, but on the other, it's introspective, contemplative, and most of all, meaningful, and more specifically, tells one of the most moving stories I've seen in a video game. You start your journey by awakening on board a space station known as the Eye, and discover that you're what is called a sleeper, a machine construct that has been filled with a copy of another human being's consciousness. Whoever you were before is now sitting in cryogenic stasis, potentially dozens of light years away, and while your original mind sleeps, your copied version in this machine husk you awaken is set to work endlessly with little breaks. In this dystopian future, artificial intelligence has been outlawed and is largely frowned upon after an event known as the Collapse, a cryptic Armageddon that has left humanity on the brink of extinction. And because AI is no longer sanctioned, some megacorporations have found a loophole by instead creating sleepers, human minds with machine bodies that can work endlessly for a couple of years as a form of paying back debts, for example. This allows corporations cheap and effective labor, while still being limited by the human mind, meaning they can dodge galactic regulations. So while we aren't sure what we did in our past life to want to sell our own mind to S&ARP Corp, the main manufacturer of sleepers, we do know that after becoming one, we managed to escape the mining conglomerate we were a slave to and hide inside a ship that found its way to this massive space station, Erlin's Eye. But once arriving here, it becomes clear that this place may be no better, and that we will have to take odd jobs all over the facility, along with meeting tons of sketchy people in order to make enough money to buy food to survive. And as if it couldn't get any worse, the bodies that sleepers inhabit are meant to slowly die, meaning in order to not lose all control of our robotic apparatus and perish, we must also either purchase or find expensive serums known as stabilizer drugs made by the same company that makes sleepers. So just like that, the stage for the game is set, and we are immediately on a clock to survive. Every day, or what are known as cycles, you awake to a set of 1 to 6 die which are randomly generated based on the amount of energy we have left in our body, and each of these dice are rolled to produce a number 1 through 6, with higher numbers having a higher chance of appearing the more well-fed you are. Every action you take in game requires you to use one of your dice, with some actions being more risky than others that can have negative side effects even, and the higher your number on a specific die, the higher chance you have of a good outcome occurring. So for example, if you want to work a shift in the shipyard dusting off old core system freighters to make some money to pay for food, you can slot in one of your remaining die and hope for the best. If you slot in a 6, you are guaranteed the most amount of money possible and no negative outcomes. But if you slot in a 1, there's a very high chance you will end up making a mistake, hurting yourself and losing energy to your robotic body, and getting no money in the process. And once you're out of dice, you must wait until the next cycle to roll again and hope for the best. So this means that every cycle is one strategic decision after another, trying to dictate what you need to do to stay alive and which dice you must save for important moments, as well as which you can throw away on any one-off chances, all while you must barely survive in the slums with shady characters everywhere. And on top of this, almost every quest in the game is designed around a timer system, where certain actions or events only have a specific number of cycles until they carry on or fail with or without you, meaning you oftentimes need to weigh what your most important tasks are against what you would just like to see, which adds a ton of needed tension to the gameplay. It's a really cool tabletop like setup, and makes especially the opening hours of this title very nerve-wracking in a good way. And when you combine that with the excellent character writing, it's not hard to get swept in pretty quickly. But if these characters don't pull you in, well then you won't be having a very good time with this game, because the gameplay itself consists of nothing more than just talking to people around you and reading paragraphs of text with no voice acting, along with committing dice actions whose results you have to, for the large part, just imagine in your head. If you were looking for combat or traditional mission design, this game isn't for you. If you thought Disco Elysium was decent but missing a sci-fi aesthetic like myself, well, you are going to like this game a lot. But regardless of whether you actually are the type of person that would enjoy the mechanics on offer here, the real crowning achievement of this title is the story it tells, the world it paints, and the lessons it teaches all of us in the end. The more you play Citizen Sleeper, the more you realize all around you on the eye are people from different walks of life. In the lowland and shipyard, you can find dilapidated city streets and buildings that have been bunched together side by side, where the downtrodden of society slave away to make enough to eat. In the high-rise apartments in locations like Tambor Tea House or the Overlook Bar, you can locate some old aristocrats and corpos that hide their wealth and status from everyone trapped on the station. And across the massive Founders Gap expanse, you are met with the Greenway and a host of dormant AI that haven't been seen in decades. Essentially, Erland's Eye is a place where some of the harshest parts of humanity have all come to clash together. And when you combine that with a refugee crisis due to some unknown events on faraway planets, it seems as if everything is about to come to a disastrous end. And along the way too, we are constantly asked questions about what it means to be human, what consciousness even is, or whether or not we are technically alive ourselves. But most notable of all, Citizen Sleeper isn't like a lot of other games with this sort of premise. There aren't tons of rival gangs and factions to join that pin themselves against one another. Rather, while it's a very politically driven world, its drama comes from individual people, not grand conspiracies and missions. And it's these characters you meet that are truly the lifeblood of the experience. When you first awake, for example, you are greeted by a jaded and elderly man named Dragos, who is being held together by cybernetics and pure will. Seeing you dying in the salvage area of the ship, he saves you and helps you get to your feet, explaining that you are a sleeper and are dying, but he has debts to pay back and must go slave away nearby in order to survive. The first quest you get in game is actually to help Dragos pay these debts back. But regardless of whether or not you want to spend your precious dice and sustenance working solely for someone else before they potentially get killed is your decision. Because after this initial event, you unlock access to travel all across the station, meeting many different people, all with interesting backstories. Early on, for instance, you come into contact with Fang, an engineer who was trying to discover the secrets of the station's past, and in exchange for your help, offers to try and turn off a tracking bracelet you discover on your robotic body. This bracelet allows S&ARP Corp to send mercenaries to decommission you after your daring escape, and the first one you meet is a man named Ethan, who is completely devoid of any empathy the second he finds you. He sees sleepers as non-human, and as such, treats you as no better than an ant which he stomps with his foot. In the shipyard, you can find Lem and Mina, a man and his apparent daughter who he wants to do nothing but protect. However, they are barely getting by eating scraps and living on the streets. Every person you meet in this world is a constant reminder of how horrible it really is, how evil society has become, and how everyone is out to survive for themselves. During Fang's quest, he constantly gets into dangerous situations without letting you know beforehand, potentially sacrificing you for his own goals. Ethan, after deciding not to immediately kill you, instead uses you as slave labor, where you must give him an allowance of your own money constantly to buy alcohol, otherwise he will just shoot you. The doctor you find on the station, who originally provides you with stabilizer drugs, seemingly betrays you, after which a Union sympathizer and cop tries to be your friend with no indication of their real intentions. Or even when you first talk to Mina and try to be kind, she is simply afraid of you and your human-robotic hybrid persona, unwilling to connect with you at all. And as if things couldn't get any more dire, the actual station itself is home to countless rogue and dangerous AI systems like the Killer Emergency Protocol, which an AI called the Hunter will use to try and kill you should you decide to use your hacking abilities to surf through the station's storied history on data terminals. Everywhere you turn are people who use you, abuse you, look down upon you, or simply couldn't care less. For as impressive as a technological feat as the eye is, the actual guts of this station couldn't be any more rotten. Clear as day, a look into the most horrible parts of humanity, in a dystopian future where people's only concern is to live another day with no hope in sight. But you see, despite all the horrors you find on the eye, despite all the tragic stories and heartless people you meet at first, Citizen Sleeper doesn't stop there. Because that isn't what this game is about. The setting, the tragedy, and the opening hours are nothing more than a backdrop, an easel from which something so much more beautiful can be crafted. Where most games seem to be content in making humanity maniacally evil, making corporations inherently bad, or individuals intrinsically selfish, Citizen Sleeper takes a much more mature and much more honest approach, slowly showing us that even in the darkness, there is always light. Remember how I mentioned the mercenary Ethan before? The one that from the very start treats you no better than a human trash can? He's one of the most unlikable and horrible people in the entire game. He tries to shoot you, he betrays you, hits you, and has no care in the world for your feelings at all. But as you play more and more of his quest, you discover a deeper sense of who this man is. As a bounty hunter, he has seen some of the worst parts of humanity many times over, and has killed countless with his own hands, leading to nightmares of the man he has become. He is hard and brash, but in part because he has to be, and while in a way he has no redeeming qualities, he is also human. At one point, after forcing you to pay for his new lifestyle on the eye for some time, he drinks himself into a stupor, allowing a bar owner to steal his gun while he's passed out, covered in his own vomit. And on top of this, the contract on your life is transferred to another more capable bounty hunter after it's clear that Ethan is taking too long. Now without his gun, his dignity, or his power, Ethan comes to you one more time. But this time, his clothes are ripped, his eyes bloodshot, and his spirits fallen. He requests that you help him get his gun back so he can protect you from the new assailant. And should you choose to help him in his time of need, when the bounty hunter arrives, he, as Ethan always does, betrays you once again, thinking he can still collect on the bounty with the new hunter, but is instead shot himself by the assassin, karma coming full circle. But the much more interesting story shows itself if you choose not to help Ethan when he comes back to you. Because under these circumstances, Ethan leaves the station forever. But in his final moments in the quest, we are told about his situation. How sad, how lonely this man is, and why he drinks so heavily every night, trying to mask the pain of a childhood and visions of the man he has become. He has no friends, no family, and no hope. A life defined by anger, aggression, and a complete lack of compassion. And while this by no means justifies the things he has done to you or how he has treated all those around him, it's a stark reminder that all of us are human, that no matter how much hatred and evil is in someone's heart, there's a soul inside of them crying in pain too. The final words in Ethan's story are nothing more than the narrator commenting on how, despite his evil, the reason he came back to you wasn't for vengeance. It was because he was looking for a friend, something he never had. Fang, the engineer that nearly screws you over or gets you killed multiple times all of his own volition, well, eventually you learn that those goals were something more noble, revealing the machinations of the station's elite who are hoarding power and control without anyone knowing it. Without Fang's actions, the station's people would never get to learn, and never get closer to rising up. And not only that, but Fang in the shadows was keeping you safe all along, using his skills and knowledge to protect you even when you seemed like you were in danger. Lem and Mina, who at first were standoffish and out for themselves, quickly grow on you despite you being half machine. After helping them get on their feet, Lem is able to afford an apartment where he and Mina can finally sleep without the fear of being trampled on or abused. Lem even allows you to come over and watch Mina as he takes odd jobs around the station to make a living. And here you can meet Mina's stuffed animal Bun Bun and make a bond to the point where she trusts you vehemently. Or what about Emphis, one of the local street vendors who at first refuses to talk to you, but after eating at his shop enough will open up about his harrowing past, implanting deadly cybernetics into his body that have ruined him, where now he fights on, trying to help those he can. In the DLC, you get to meet Helene and Peak, who are working to help the refugees on the Eye, but in the process are also potentially causing great harm to the trust between the station and the refugees with their own daring escape plan. Some of the Haven Gate Union forces, who are supposedly evil, try to stop you from helping, and despite all the horrific things you have heard about this pseudo-police force, actually getting to meet some of their personnel results in a much deeper understanding. Most of Haven Gate agents aren't actually trying to hurt the refugees. They don't hate them. It's simply the troubles of bureaucracy and a lack of resources to help while trying to make sure that everyone can survive. What at first seems to be so black and white, poor versus rich, the haves versus the have-nots, turned out to be two sets of people refusing to understand one another. But at their core, they both were fighting for the same thing. But if there's one quest in this game that made me truly understand this idea, it's meeting with the gardener. After first crossing the gap in the station by paying a toll or getting a pass, the first thing you are greeted with on the more secluded part of the Eye is the Greenway. It's a section of the megastructure that was abandoned for years, and now is home to a metropolis of food and vegetation. Because it's in the Greenway where plants and fungi are grown to keep the inhabitants of the station fed, but no one knows how this paradise of sorts has survived. Even after the fall, when this part of the station was left to rot, after coming back years later, it was discovered that upon recolonizing the area, the plant life began to flourish even more than before. You meet a woman named Rico, who tends to the gardens, and from the moment you meet her is the only person to, without hesitation, accept you and your faults, offering simply to talk with you and become your friend. And eventually she asks that you help her discover the secrets of the plants that grow for no reason. And if you do, you discover a moment that changes everything. You see, deep beneath the Greenway, in the fiber optic and metal constructs of the station, there is a haze in the data cloud. Whereas everywhere else on the Eye, you are able to tap into the data layer and try to hack different terminals for information and resources, in the Greenway, everything is a dark and obfuscated layer of corrupted bits. And it's this haze that is key to discovering the secrets of the Greenway. With the help of characters like a sentient vending machine, Neovend, as well as Fang from before, you are able to obtain a cipher key that allows access to hidden data, which puts you into contact with a new AI called the Gardener, who grants you a seed which you need to plant. If you talk with Rico about this, she agrees that you will plant the seed and see what's next, and she informs you that after more research, it's clear that the Gardener AI is actually the one that kept the Greenway alive, that the growth and salvation is due to the heuristics of this robotic creature, but also that she is scared. She has only met one sleeper before, and they ran away into the deep and unexplored parts of the Greenway long ago, never to be seen again, and she, without even saying it, makes it clear she's scared she's losing you too. When the seed offered to you by the Gardener finally finishes growing, you are able to come back and offer yourself into the world of the data cloud, sitting in a chair as Rico holds your hand, coming to one final confrontation with this Gardener. He tells you that the world you are in pales in comparison to where you truly belong, in the data cloud itself, and that he can offer you true salvation by severing the connection between your mind and body to forever let you live on in this utopia of sorts, free from the shackles of hatred and disgust on the Eye. But it was in that moment, being offered freedom from the struggles I had been going through for hours now, finally a way to escape my pain and run off into the digitized and invisible world of ones and zeros, in some regards where I truly belonged, that I refused. And the reason I did was because despite how horrible the Eye was, how many sickening things I had seen and experienced, I knew that back on that station was that old and kind woman named Rico holding my hand, with tears in her eyes, hoping I would come back, that she wouldn't lose me like she had the previous sleeper she met. The Greenway wasn't an escape. It was a realization that I never needed to leave. That back on the station, despite all the chaos, was something more meaningful than just living a life stripped of struggle, a utopia. There were people I cared about, and part of caring for them was accepting that things would never be easy, but that I would always be there for them in the end to face it. And then I thought about Lem, about Mina, Somewhere on the other side of the station, those two were sitting in the corner of an apartment building I helped them achieve, and in many ways their only hope of getting off this station like they dreamed was me. I wasn't alone in my robotic body on the eye. I never was. Because the people around me were always there, always despite their own problems, willing to help me out with mine. I didn't mention it before, but throughout my entire time getting to know Lem and Mina, they always offered me help even when I was dying, despite the fact they had nothing to give. And after talking with Lem more, you find out that Mina isn't even his real daughter. He found her alone and afraid on an abandoned ship, and when police arrived, refused to relinquish her from his grasp, holding on to her cold and dying body to make sure she could survive. And from that moment on, Lem promised that he would do whatever it took to give Mina the life that she deserved. Without her, and with only one mouth to feed, Lem would have lived a much more luxurious life on the Eye, and would have been able to survive easily with his contract. But from the moment he found her, alone and afraid, he dedicated his life to making hers. It was the human condition, and the greatness within it, a greatness that so many people nowadays refuse to see in our real lives, that made me turn away from the gardener's proposition to join a new utopia and instead thrust myself back into hell. Because in this hell, on the Eye, were others struggling, others that needed help. And like Lem, despite my own desires to live in perfect harmony myself, there was a much deeper meaning to my life, to my journey on this station as a robot. It was time to stop doing everything for myself, for my own happiness and survival, and instead turn to others. I was going to help Lem and Mina, no matter what it took. When I arrived back at their apartment, Mina was alone, on the floor playing with the Bun Bun. For a time, I sat on the floor next to her, asking her where Lem had gone and why he was missing, but Mina simply ignored me and played on. There had been a recent raffle to see who in the station would be allowed to join the crew of the Cider Owl, a colony ship that would be taking thousands to a new planet in search of hope. Lem saw this as his and Mina's only chance of escaping the station, of finally showing Mina a better life. But during the raffle, it was made clear that Lem was lied to, that only the rich and elite would be given tickets, and that he was never actually in the running. So in his depressed stupor, he had vanished. But just when I thought something horrible may have happened, he reappeared from his room and confided in me the sadness that had overcome him. Lem and Mina were never getting off this station. Their hopes and dreams were gone. But when I looked back to Mina in her innocence on the floor, staring into Bun Bun's eyes with the gleeful hope only a child could have, is when I discovered my purpose. I was going to get Lem and Mina on that colony ship, no matter what it took. And to do this, I eventually came into contact with a shady data runner and hacker named Castor, who offered me one deal. By signing my life away, by giving him full control to see through my body and potentially even use it, he would create fake tickets to the Cider Owl which would allow us on board. And so I accepted, and after placing a peculiar white cube into my hand, I became infected, which also saved Lem and Mina's future. And as we approached the Cider Owl, Lem was bursting with joy, and Mina was jumping up and down, excited for the future. But when we crossed into the final entrances to the ship, Lem and Mina took the first steps, and I stood for a moment, knowing that if I went onto this colony ship, I may not survive. Without guaranteed access to stabilizer drugs, I would likely perish, and if I did survive, I would be dooming my real body in cryosleep to death over decades. But then, I remembered Mina, and how before she had told me she was afraid, but that she felt safe with me when I would watch her, and asked me to promise I would never leave her like her parents. So I decided that I would risk potentially my life and my future in order to secure hers along with Lem's, and forced my way onto the colony ship, not sure of what I would find next. And as I boarded the ship, Mina asked me one last question. "Are we family, robot?" To which I replied, "I guess so." And just like that, after so much pain, so much struggle, it was time to sail away into the stars with the people I truly cared about. Maybe my robotic body would die. Maybe we would be left stranded on a desolate rock in the dark abyss of space. Or maybe my life in this future would be even worse than that on the Eye. But no matter what happened to my body, to my mind, my soul would stay intact, choosing to help those around me no matter the cost. A story that reminds us all that no matter what, humanity can be great too. You know, for as much as our modern era is characterized by division or hatred on social media and between one another, wherever you look, there is always something more beautiful too. A world full of people that even in the face of pain, stand above it for their fellow man. And well, Citizen Sleeper is a game about never forgetting this fact. A game about being optimistic in spite of how pessimistic the world has become. But maybe no single moment is more powerful in showing this than the one that made me fall in love with this story and the entire reason I made this video in the first place. Where after meeting the gardener, when I decided to give up all hope for my own future and instead go back to the ones I love to protect them, I was greeted with this message. And then, after an age of crossing, you are there, settling back into the chair, into a body in a chair, and the overwhelming sensations that come with being a living thing with a rich and detailed sensorium. For a moment, you feel like you have made a terrible mistake. Who would choose this weight, this anxiety, this deep well at the center of existence? But then you feel it, Rico's hand, gripped around yours, trembling a little, sweating a little. Rico's hand with its brittle bones and crumpled skin. Rico's hand. And in that moment, you understand why you made this choice. And then you squeeze Rico's hand and wake up. No matter how hard things get, no matter how much sadness and pain we unearth in the world around us, no matter how much hopelessness we feel trapped in a cage with the walls closing in, don't ever forget that it's the people beside you that are the ones that matter most. And that by becoming a beacon of light, even in a sea of darkness, a person who is understanding, caring, in the face of a world who seems not to mind, you can always inspire hope and lead to a better us. So if you are asleep, wake up. And as always, thanks for watching.